My name's James Austin. I'm the senior manager for cloud engineering at Juniper Networks. I go by Jimmy frequently. You'll see that interchangeable. So if you've seen that, I go by both. Yeah, I've been at Juniper for about 14 years in different roles. I started out on the consulting side, professional services delivery, working into, I managed the automation team, doing consultancy. And 4 years ago, I joined the cloud engineering team with a new organization inside of Juniper Networks that was dedicated toward cloud native serverless application development and deployment with a relatively small team, around 10 to 15 individual contributors doing sustainment, engineering, the whole gambit. For Juniper Networks, it was quite a leap. So I'm excited to talk about it, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining and agreeing to kind of be our first our first chat.
Yeah.
For those who don't know me already, I'm Sriya. I am the field CTO for the Americas at Wiz. My primary directive is around operationalizing and helping customers kind of get to good and best utilize Wiz and place it most effectively within their environments. So, talking to customers like Jimmy who are, I think, doing a great job of operationalizing specific tools is like my favorite thing to do. Um, Before we kind of jump right in, can you tell me a little bit about Juniper and about your environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So Juniper Networks, global leader in networking infrastructure, hardware and software solutions, including routing, switching, firewall, security. Juniper's been around for a long time and frankly carries a lot of traffic across the internet, service provider presence, enterprise space, security space. It's wonderful. Here in my present role, again, just to recap what I started with, I was asked to lead a team to put together, start doing, cloud native application development, specifically geared around IoT solutions to gather data at scale. And it was an interesting challenge with a very diverse team from primarily network engineers. There's a lot of them here at Juniper Networks, obviously. But then we brought in some pure software engineers, and we were trying to, we didn't know what we couldn't do at the beginning. And we kind of started off with kind of a science project, sort of an early effort into AWS to understand what the capabilities of the platform were. And we didn't know what wasn't possible or wasn't feasible, and we made a lot of mistakes along the way. So our software factory and DevOps pipeline is geared specifically towards what the application that we're developing, although we've built it in a way that it's not linked to that application, so we have some flexibility in what we can do with it. Our journey is probably much like many of your other customers, where we made it work, we got it running in the cloud, and then somebody said, "What about security? What about legal? What about compliance? What about all of these other stakeholders?" The definition of done in modern cloud architecture or cloud application isn't just does it work. Hello world is no longer the standard, right? So, an interesting journey, and I can talk about this for hours, but I'll let you lead the conversation so I don't ramble too much.
Well, honestly, like just to kind of give the audience some background, we had a few conversations beforehand, and I think the way you guys deployed is so interesting, but also I think your perspective around how development org and the security org should kind of like work together, and I think working together kind of comes out with a better product. So
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
No, I think it is interesting. I think I've been in technology a long time now, and I think I've seen the kind of the green check mark mentality of security wants to audit our the engineering's application, and then there's kind of some consternation, a little bit of friction, maybe legal, maybe compliance, these kind of things. And what I decided early on is I didn't want these things to be after the fact. Once we found that the application we were working on started to gain some traction in the market, we immediately said, well, we want to do this the best we possibly can and identify the best partners in the industry from a vendor perspective in order to do that. I think initially we rolled the application out. We were happy. We had some beta customers. And then somebody asked about a security vulnerability that they had discovered while it was running. And we realized our security solution there, which is very much after the fact, after it was there. And we were forced to kind of slow down a little bit and reevaluate. And Wiz kind of showed up at a perfect time. Now, we embraced a few principles early on. One of them is 100% infrastructure as code. So what that effectively means is we do not do anything manually in the cloud. A little bit of a learning curve for folks that like to do things manually. Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. But once we got, a basic source code control solution in place, we use Jira to be very clear on for the project management side of it. And then our Git implementation to manage source code, and then our DevOps pipeline being, multi-branch Jenkins pipeline, which I think many of you actually use. And then that gave us the ability to kind of add things into our delivery motion from a software perspective that could meet the needs of some of our other organizations inside of Juniper that were stakeholders or had an interest in either from, again, security compliance or legal perspective, to make sure we were doing things appropriately. Now, as an engineering manager with a small team, a lot of these things they almost feel interrupt driven. They're very disruptive. Some third party organization says, I need this from your application because they need to get that check mark. And kind of have a philosophy that if you ask me for something once, you're probably going to ask me for it again. So I endeavor to make sure that our delivery motion actually meets the needs of not only our users of the application, but any other stakeholder. So two reasons. The most important one to me is I don't want you to bother me. I want to give you the information and make it accessible to you at any point that you potentially need it. I think, to be successful in this space, you absolutely have to break down organizational silos and barriers and form strong partnerships with individuals or people that are leading the way in these groups in order to actually start to shift the agenda and make sure that, you can deliver as efficiently as possible. Context switching, huge interrupts are killers to velocity, and we endeavor to be incredibly efficient and agile to the business needs, right? So that's kind of where our philosophy comes from. For us, when Wiz came along, we said, well, let's look at Wiz. And I remember the security architect here at Juniper had called me and said, would you be willing to test drive a new security tool that we're looking at? And I said, absolutely. Does it, I asked a few fundamental questions. One, can I integrate it with our DevOps pipeline? Two, do I got to pay for it? That might have been question one, actually. Number three, what's the utility of it and how's it work? Is it agentless? Is there an agent? How much rework do I have to do to implement it? And they said, well, it's wiz.io. Go take a look at it and let me know what you think. And I read the first couple of pages and I said, well, it looks like I can just turn it on. And so that's what we did. I think initially we didn't have lofty goals about where Wiz would fit. So I just enabled the connector for our devs AWS infrastructure account and fired it up. And after I got it over the horror of the initial findings, I realized that this tool has a lot of capability for us in terms of security perspective. So initially, I think when deploying a tool like Wiz into a brownfield environment, the time to value was minutes. As soon as I turned it on, it was relatively quick. I'd say within an hour, we were able to get a decent view into the state of our application from a security perspective. Now, I'll go into it a little bit more about what else we were able to get from that. But at the end of that first day, I realized, well, this has the potential to be a game changer. And then I discovered some of the integration capabilities of the Wiz platform. Specifically, I think the first one that we configured was the integration with Jira. All right, just because I wanted the ability to quickly create an issue for action inside of our DevOps infrastructure, our software factory, if you will, without cutting and pasting and all this sort of stuff, just from an efficiency perspective. Again, we're a small team with a huge amount of work in front of us. So the ease of use was super important to us. So I configured that and it worked almost immediately. So within the first 24 hours of even using it, I had a good view about the state from a security perspective of our development environment, therefore our entire application. Again, we're 100% IAC, so our dev environments mirror our production and stage UAT environments, that sort of thing. So I got the integration set up. I was able to automatically open a few tickets in our Jira. And the great part about that was from a security compliance perspective, when the vulnerability was discovered, I was able to actually provide an audit trail of when the security tool, Wiz in this case, found the problem, when the ticket was opened, and what line of code remediated it. And that's hugely important, certainly when you're dealing with things like customer data or sensitive data, or you're subject to things like SOC 2 or 27001 standards. We were able to do that relatively quickly. So this was probably, again, that was 48 hours of work. It was that easy to actually get it running. The next piece of it, I would say the cool part about Wiz, if you stop there, you're already realizing a tremendous amount of value for your organization. Even if you don't have a fully advanced DevOps infrastructure, or you're not quite where you want to be, or you have a legacy infrastructure that has kind of grown organically, and you're just kind of worried about, the state of it, Wiz can solve that in minutes, right? So for us, we set a goal for ourselves to have zero critical, high, or even medium vulnerabilities in our application, which is relatively lofty. But we were able to accomplish that within, I'd say, a month or two. Now, I will mention a side effect of that, which I thought was incredibly interesting, which is that we not only did we improve our security posture, we were also able to realize some cost savings. One of the things that you see when Wiz, beyond being a security tool, that visibility required to understand the security posture of your application also gives you the ability to understand where you're being wasteful. The easiest way to secure something is for it not to exist. So we were able to realize significant cost savings across our development environments just because of these zombie cloud artifacts that get created organically over time. And that was a huge win for us. So that's kind of where our first maybe month of our journey with Wiz kind of landed us. And which is where I'm going to kind of get to the next part, unless you have some more questions on that area.
No,
Yeah.
well, I did want to kind of like dive a little bit deeper on like kind of like how you were shifting left. But before that, I just want to kind of reiterate something that I kind of like a theme that I was noticing in when you were speaking just now is the efficiency piece, right? Would you say that um like efficiency is like the most important thing to you, like when you're talking about security tooling and kind of putting something like Wiz in place that's kind of looking at your runtime, that's looking at your like I think build time as well.
Yeah, I think, when you're a small team or any size team, really, customers, things that don't move the needle from a business perspective or business stakeholder perspective or a customer perspective directly, meaning things that they can't actually observe. It's not a new feature. It's not something that they're going to realize some value from, but it is incredibly important to the stakeholders of a given cloud application. Um, the overhead required to do that, you don't necessarily always get that from the PLM teams that are designing the requirements for the application. They just, they're focused on business value that the application can provide. So when you have this kind of requirement, if you're trying to be a top-end cloud team, a cloud engineering team, a tool that, doesn't require a ton of configuration, I'm not constantly wrestling with it. I don't have to take 14 dev weeks to get it running. Time to value and efficiency is everything. And efficiency beyond just, breeding agility and also promoting your ability to deploy and to rapidly deploy secure solutions is everything. I think that's really the mark, one of the indicators of the maturity of a given engineering organization. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think like we can all take away something from that, especially as we're trying, as security professionals, as we're trying to roll out to development teams and kind of build those partnerships. I think maybe stressing on that efficiency is super important, like not just the security, but also like it's so easy to use. You can deploy it pretty quickly. It's you can implement it very fast. So um, I love that.
Yeah, time to value, right? So that's something that we look for in all of our vendor relationships. And I got to say, honestly, and I'm not saying this just because this is a Wiz webinar. I think if I look at all of our vendors, Wiz, from the account team engagement to the assistants, I think the biweekly meetings we have with our account team, I really can't compare the level of engagement that Wiz provides that I get on the surface with other vendors in some certain circumstances. Wiz, our account team certainly seems dedicated to our success, and we appreciate that. Again, we're going to talk more about how we've continued to leverage Wiz as a product. But early on, that was critical for us. But quite honestly, we didn't need it. I mean, it was so easy to spin up initially. It was simply adding, a role to facilitate the access, and then there was the result. I think we saw like a critical issue like day one that, kind of threw me into a panic. I was like, well, we have to fix this, right? So once we got over the initial hurdle, we started to shift the conversation. Like, what else can we do with this? Yeah.
Definitely. Let's dive a little bit deeper into kind of your CI/CD. And before we talk about just like outcomes or what that looks like in your organization today, like I'd love to talk about just your deployment process. Like, did you already have kind of a CI/CD tool that you were using already, or was Wiz brand new for you?
So to be totally honest, when I came to this, we started this effort 3.5, 4 years ago. We didn't have anything. We had no idea. We had an idea, and we had a directive from the organization on what they were looking to achieve. Traditional, Kubernetes-based workloads, or even EC2-based workloads or server-based workloads. For certain things, make a ton of sense. For other things, they don't so much. And one of the things that kind of, the serverless sort of paradigm represented from an efficiency perspective, a cost efficiency, right? And also just ease of administration once we got over those early hurdles, right? So it started out with simple questions. How are we going to manage source code? Right. How are we going to manage work activities across a geographically distributed team? Right. So we started selecting vendors to facilitate that. And then, orchestrating our actual build infrastructure. We got that done. I think that took a long time. That was, months and months of effort and constant improvement and iteration to arrive at a point where we were able to have developers check code out of a repo, deploy it back to that repo with whatever change or feature they were adding, and then have it automatically be deployed to the cloud. Simplistic, the most basic CI/CD you could possibly get, but that's actually where we started. Very simple architecture. Yeah.
Definitely. And then how did kind of deployment work for you?
So my goal generally is to hide from developers, or actually from anyone, to constrain the workload to what their skill set is geared to doing. If you're a developer, I would prefer that you write code, right? That's your skill set. That's your academic or work background. I want you to do that. I don't really want you to focus on CI or CD or what happens from the Jenkins perspective. Obviously everyone understands how that works for troubleshooting builds and that sort of thing. But the more that we can abstract that from the individual stakeholders that are, the people that are working in our software factory, the better, right? So that's kind of just been from a philosophy perspective, something that I've embraced. Um, just to avoid the confusion, right? I mean, I think if you give, and these distributed cloud or multi-cloud or hybrid cloud applications can grow into monsters relatively quickly, and the best thing that you can do is not force everyone working on it to understand everything end to end from the beginning, right? The other thing that allowed us to do was start imposing constraints, and this, I think we're kind of headed this direction, yeah. So about how we can kind of change our DevOps motion a little bit, leveraging some automated processes in our CI/CD environment.
Right. Like what types of automated processes do you have kind of built in?
Yeah, so we again we use Jenkins primarily, or an enterprise implementation of Jenkins to facilitate our deployments, which gives you all the flexibility that you get, right? So we use a couple of different paradigms, for connectors to cloud, and even in some case some scripting, right? Whatever we need to do to affect the deployment, depending on what the target is, if it's AWS or another cloud provider or or whatever it is. We can quickly spin up an appropriate connector to facilitate deployment from a CI/CD system. I mean, Jenkins has been around forever, but regardless of your build system, these ideas have been around for a long, long, long time, and they're becoming more and more and more mature, right? And much more easier to implement. It's a hyper-competitive space. There's many vendors here, and I think from a build perspective, it comes down to a couple questions, right? One, what is the skill set of the team that's going to be using it? Where are their strong suits? And what are the capabilities of the tool? And the decision of the vendor selection there isn't just, reading a report on, what are the 10 best CI/CD solutions and then buying, whatever one's cheaper, right? That doesn't work in this space. So you have to consider the team. You have to consider their skills. You have to consider the strategic direction that you see your engineering organization being pushed in, and that's what really drove our vendor selection there. But yeah, it's again, it's not black magic. I think it's something that we've all done, and there's just a tremendous amount of stuff out there about how you can implement a CI/CD system in your environments. I mean, even the source control vendors now are including a lot of these capabilities inside of their source control tools, much to the chagrin of certain individuals that believe if you're doing source control, you should do source control and do it well, right? But whatever. That's basically the high level view of how we landed where we were when we engaged with Wiz.
Awesome. And when we kind of like diving a little bit like I think like deeper in your CI/CD life cycle, like what does that look like today? Are you blocking? Like what types of policies do you have set up? And
Yes.
how's that working for you? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt you there, but initially it just became a step in a pipeline, right? We were like, well, let's see what Wiz's capabilities are to be able to run some of these scans so that vulnerabilities can be detected before deployment happens. That's always the best thing that you can possibly do is enforce your policies, whether it's organizational configuration standards or cloud configuration standards or even legal or security requirements. The closer you can get that to the developer, again, it's about efficiency, right? If you don't deploy it, it's efficiency and risk, really. You don't if you don't deploy something to the cloud, it can't be exploited in the cloud, right? So the idea that we could leverage Wiz, and I remember it was during one of the bi-weekly Wiz stand-up calls that we had, where they said, we've got this Wiz CLI tool. And I said, well, that's very interesting. Let me poke around a little bit. And again, I think within 2 or 3 days, I had a mock project set up, and I was like, oh, wow, this thing, I can configure these policies based on the target environment that I'm deploying to. And I can start to dial in a little bit of control about what gets deployed in the cloud. Now, obviously, where we started was we couldn't crush our velocity. We still had to be able to deploy. We still had to be able to respond to the business needs and bugs and features, that sort of thing. So initially it was a super permissive. We just wanted to know, right? Just audit, right? And what we discovered, I didn't tell the development team about this, by the way. I kind of some astute folks noticed it, but we put it in place. And then I think every stand up that I do every couple of days, I would say, hey, by the way, pretty soon, check Wiz on your application architecture, what the output of your particular project or your component of this application. Because starting on this date, if you try to do a build and it has a critical or high vulnerability, it's going to fail. And everyone, initially there was a little bit of consternation with developers. How am I supposed to do development? I was like, oh, that's a really good point. Let me look at Wiz's capabilities to have policies based on destination environment, and how easy would that be for me to get in our pipeline. So if you have a traditional architecture of like a dev stage prod, whatever it is, Wiz is very easy to suggest if the destination environment is dev, for example, maybe you want to be more permissive. Certainly, if you're working on something that it could be a science project or an exploratory effort, you definitely don't want to hamper that level of creativity. You want the audit from it, but you don't necessarily want to stop that build. Certainly, if it's a private. So we were then able to dial it up a little bit. And I'll remember the day when I got the phone call from a very senior engineer on my team, and he was actually quite angry. He said, I tried to deploy something and it failed. It just says build failed. And I said, well, did you look at the output of the build? And he says, yeah, what's this Wiz security scanning step in here? And I was like, yeah, that's where we actually took what we're doing in Wiz and we moved it closer to you. And he goes, oh, that's irritating. That took so much time. And I was like, oh, if you don't like how long that takes, well, then you can run the very same thing we're running in our CI/CD environment inside of your IDE. And then it'd be a heck of a lot more efficient. It'll evaluate your code before you even push it. And I started just taking away these arguments away, right? And as a dev manager, I liked being able to point at the system that was rejecting the code, right? In agreeing on these principles. So that's really where that started, was that whole idea. And we've continued that motion over the last, 4 or 5 months to continue to push the requirements of our customers and our organization closer and closer to the developer at the point of when the code hits the IDE. We want to understand the state of it and have it be traceable and auditable. Additionally, with Wiz was a security one from a security posture perspective. We also have other requirements, right? People start talking about, well, I need an SBOM, right? A software bill of materials. And like, oh, how can Wiz has an SBOM capability in here that we might be able to leverage? Or there's an integration that we need to do with another tool. We just slowly started maturing our DevOps pipeline and effectively shifting left.
That's awesome. And I think you started touching on like problems and like when people were kind of getting contentious about it. Could you kind of describe like the types of problems that you were having, like if you had problems, like the types of problems that you were having, kind of how you dealt with contentious individuals, maybe individuals who did not want to adopt? Or
Yeah,
for you? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, I think that all questions are open all the time. And I think that answers, certainly in this space, need to be based on fact. need to be based on facts as it relates to the specific use case you're arguing about. I do not participate in subjective arguments. What color is your favorite? These kind of conversations, again, from an efficiency perspective, are killers, and that tends to happen in the tool space or in the DevOps space or even the technology choices that get made. But the reality is, the answer is there is no one right way to do anything. There's a million different ways to accomplish things, and the answers aren't always, what's best. You can't ask ChatGPT, what's the best, security solution I should do for my team of engineers, at least not yet, right? So I think it's just an open conversation. So when there isn't a differing opinion, I'll say, okay, well, you have your opinion, I have data. Let's compare and contrast. And so we kind of, from a culture philosophy perspective, it turns into a competition of ideas. And if you're able to distill these discussions down into basic fundamental tenets of, what are we arguing about here? What's your aversion? It slows you down? Well, how about you integrate it here? And one of the really great things about Wiz is it's not opinionated about how you implement it. It gives you enough flexibility that you can adjust it accordingly. And the other side of it, I think historically engineering teams, when security or somebody says, I need to install this thing, there's this, great amounts of trepidation and fear and mistrust. I kind of took the opposite approach where we reached out to the security team and the legal team and the compliance team. I said, well, what do you need? And what we discovered was it became a much better relationship once we sort of dropped the veil a little bit. I believe in being 100% transparent inside of the organization about how we're operating, where the skeletons are. But I asked the same of the people that we're interoperating with. And so I'm very, very transparent. So that tends to take away arguments, right? That as soon as you kind of just, show your cards, so to speak, there's nothing to really argue about or shade or color. It just becomes a competition of ideas, right? And Wiz is just a tool that really gives you a place where you can't argue with a security graph output. You can't argue with a CI/CD scan output showing the number of blocked policies. You can't say that that's bad. You can measure the efficiency, right? A decrease in efficiency by a given system. You can measure the increase in efficiency, right? So for us, I think again, it's at least my personal philosophy is it's an open conversation. If you've got a better idea, bring your data, bring your hypothesis, and let's prove it out. Let's figure it out together because technology is evolving so fast. You have to evolve your thinking as well, and that only happens with the skilled professionals coming together and having open conversations from the perspective of what's best for the application and the application stakeholders. And that's not just the engineering team. It's not just the security team. It's not just the legal compliance team. It's all of them, right? So I think it's interesting. Certainly, depending on the personalities that you're interacting with, sometimes they take a step back. They're like, "Wait, you're just going to give me this?" Yes, I'm going to. This is why I never want to speak to you again unless there's a problem. Not that you're not a nice person, but we're busy and we've got things to do. Does this meet your needs? Yes or no? If it doesn't, iterate. But otherwise, we all got things to do. And my focus is on delivering the best, secure, quality solutions I can for Juniper Networks and our customers. And you're focused in legal, you're focused in compliance. You're worried about SAST, DAST, SBOM, format stuff. And I realized that you need these artifacts to be able to do your job, and we all work for the same company. So how can we help each other, right? But yeah, it's not always easy, but that's how we do it here.
That's a great perspective. Really quick question from the chat from John. He's curious about how you customized or designed the acceptance or failure criteria for the pipeline when deploying, or
Yeah,
if you don't use defaults.
Yeah, so when we started, hopefully I don't get too technical on the for the general audience. I'm not sure who the audience is, but really, so you can define admission policies inside of Wiz, and your account teams can definitely talk to you about that. For us, I did it very simplistically, right? We just basically said, okay, we've got this policy, application name dash dev. And what we did was we named our application policies based after the destination environment. And our environments are mapped to get branches, right? So that's how we kind of stitch everything together. So basically, if you are promoting code from a feature branch, say, into dev, the app name dash dev admission controller or admission policy applies in CI/CD to that. And obviously, when we started out, it was 100% open. Just we wanted the output that we could see what was actually going by, and then we slowly started ratcheting it down. Right? Oh, maybe this one component of the app we're gonna disregard criticals or block criticals, and then we started pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down. And then what we also did is when we did have a build that was rejected by this finding that Wiz had as we were shifted left, that's let's say it made it out of the developer's ID, I got into the dev. A frequent conversation is, hey, this even does this finding even applicable to our application? I think any security tool or any reporting tool about an application, it has to appeal to the largest market and the most general use case possible. So there is room. We do both. One of them was we either dial down the severity or you can actually customize the severity level of a given type of alert. So it's an ongoing conversation. Sometimes it's we got to go fast. We got to get this feature out here, and we end up saying, you can in Wiz, you can postpone findings and have to be forced to revisit them. We try really hard not to do that. We try to solve these problems as they come up as efficiently as possible. And the answer sometimes is how long is it going to take to implement? What is the true exposure based on this finding to the application? Is it mitigated elsewhere? Should we be alerting at this? And the admission policy controller gives you the ability to kind of differentiate that or have that granular level of control. So it's not a matter of just relying on Wiz's baseline priority level for given findings. That's actually adjustable. So you've got, basically three-dimensional kind of flexibility in your implementation of it. And I would say my guidance, if I were starting this all over again, I would just turn it on, get it integrated in a base form. Don't block anything unless that's your organizational directive. But I would say I wouldn't block anything initially. It would be audit based, and then organically over time, as your application, as you're releasing new features, you slowly start dialing that down a little bit, where there's a careful balance between security posture and velocity for the engineering team. That's how I did it anyway. When I say
Um,
I'm sorry, we. There's 10 of us that work on this particular project. Yeah, it was definitely a collective effort. I happen to be the most passionate about it, so uh, I did a lot of that early work.
I don't know, we love the passion here. Um, uh, when so we spent a little time talking about like kind of like the policy selection in terms of like actually those configuration level policies, the vulnerability level policies. Did you as a part of an engineering org, did you have like a I'm just tripping over my words today. Did you have a piece in that policy selection? And how did that relationship work?
This is an ongoing narrative for us, right? So part of breaking down silos between, let's say, security and engineering or legal or compliance or whatever the group is that you're has a stake in what you're delivering. You will have some disagreement, right? There will feel sometimes like you need to kind of work through it. For us, we're kind of the engineering that's kind of wagging the dog, right? So we're able to just form a collaborative relationship with these stakeholders and say, here's what's possible with our tool chain. Here's what the artifacts that we can produce. Here's, how we can provide it to you, whether it's an API or a flat file or whatever it is. How would you like this? How would you like to receive this? Now, if you have an organization where you've got a very mature security posture, well, then maybe you won't be wagging that dog so much. But it still should be an open communication with these stakeholders. If you're subject to some security posture, again, if your philosophy is all questions are open, subjective positions must be supported with data. A lot of that stuff, those problems that tend to grind or tend to cause disillusionment or even adversarial relationships they're just organizational killers. They don't have air to breathe. They kind of die when they're on the vine. And invariably, every couple of weeks or every couple of months, I'll be invited to a call, and there'll be a new face or a new individual, and they say, at this other company, we use this. which
Wow.
is the equivalent to say that your grandma uses 2.5 cups of lemon sugar for her lemonade and mine uses one, and it's based on the diabetic population of the household, right? But you have no idea what's actually happening. Really weird analogy, but it's the one that came up off top of the cup, right? Environment matters, right? Use case matters. Just because it worked at one company or one other team, or even for one specific thing or component in your application doesn't mean it works for all of them, right? So I think flexibility, competitions of ideas, and a platform like Wiz that gives you the ability to have that data and debate over the real facts of the state of the application and the real interest of the stakeholders. That's priceless. Anytime I get invited to an engineering discussion or a meeting and there's not a diagram, just a bunch of stakeholders talking, or there's not a web UI like Wiz that's up that we can talk about, I I suggest that we get one because otherwise we're just talking, and that's not why they're paying us.
Definitely. And it kind of like leads into my next question in terms of tracking and data and KPIs, like what was important for you to measure initially and like what are you measuring today and continuously?
Yeah, so we've got multiple indicators of our velocity as an engineering team. So obviously, commits, merges over time, size of the code base, your project management tool, whatever that is, metrics from those tools. But what's really cool about Wiz is you can actually look at the performance of your larger organization or your team. You've got another view into that. And I think you had some information that actually showed the number of issues versus the number of things that were being caught in CI/CD. And so it just gives you another viewpoint. And one of the metrics it gives you is how much better are you getting as a cloud engineering team? And I remember the really great moment for me was when we were working on something and a developer came to me and said, oh, I got these IAM policies and I can't commit that feature branch yet. And I go, why? And he's like, well, I need to lock down these. Right now I got some wildcard permissions in there and I know our system's going to reject it. And then the conversation just moved right on. Now, if you rewind that conversation prior to our shifting left in a Wiz architecture, it's different. It's basically it would get rolled out. Security tool would flag it. Hopefully, it wouldn't be discovered by a nefarious or a bad actor that could be exploited. And it's just a really kind of a rickety place to stand, right? So I think the goal is always to find firmer ground and always to move towards progress and constantly iterate, right? So I kind of lost track. I'm losing my words as well this morning, but that's kind of the philosophy that we had.
Awesome. Um, Let me actually share that outcome slide and let's talk about some outcomes that you've had and maybe like what your oh, I just raised my hand. I didn't want to do that. Um, about the outcomes that you had and like where are you trying to go from here? Oh, this. Okay. So from what we can see about your environment, right? Like, and this is that CI/CD integration pipeline slide, and I think it's so cool to see, right? Where you can see your as your CI/CD scans go up, your actually newly created issues go down, and that was, I think something like this really stood out to me and was really impactful. We know that you have zero high and critical issues within your BU. Um, that you're doing like a good amount of scans weekly and you're kind of scanning across the board. So other than this, like, how would you say like both tangible and intangible results, like what are you seeing?
I think our velocity has gone up. Anytime that, something gets off of the radar from a development perspective and you have to revisit it, it represents rework, which generally in the engineering world results in context switching because you've already moved on to the next topic. And now as an engineer, you got to dive back in and go, oh, I got to remediate this thing. Let me remember how this even worked. What was I using this for? And it's a tremendous, a velocity killer, or at least inhibiting your ability to move on. And so for us, that's kind of an intangible outcome of this sort of thing. You're able to stay on task and make sure that it meets, the performance goals of the application component you're working on, but also meets the security components as well without the rework. So that's some efficiency that I've definitely noticed as we've kind of, progressed, shifting left and maturing as an engineering organization. the scans weekly, I think this number, that's fairly impressive. So each one of those represents a merge request, right? For a relatively small team, that's just a high velocity application. Maybe some of you have got cooler data with more developers and more complex applications. I'd love to hear that. One of the reasons I was excited to participate in this is because I definitely want to hear what my peers and our peers in the industry are doing. Happy to have these discussions as openly and honestly as I can. Ultimately, security, I think, and I'm going to get on the soapbox a little bit. As industry technologists and professionals, it's our responsibility. I realize there's competition between companies and between organizations, but when it comes to customer data, we can all agree that as technologists, we have a responsibility to act uh, in a responsible way. Sharing information and talking about this, I'm more than happy to do it within what I'm allowed to discuss, obviously, right? So happy to do it. I think where do we go from here? So we really are using the Wiz kind of even though we've highly customized it, we do see the potential to use Wiz to implement some standards organizationally around how we define cloud infrastructure and objects, right? We do see the ability potentially to start saying, yes, technically both of these two solutions, solution A, solution B, fulfill the need of the application. Neither one of them generates Wiz alerts, right? But with an admission controller kind of model, I can say, well, 10 developers we have working on this, 9 of them would do it this way, and the other place we do it this way, and you're doing it this way. Although technically not wrong, does create technical debt for us organizationally. Again, as a small team with a huge amount of responsibility, including our own tools, our own sustainment, our own, a lot of our own post implementation support activities. That's just about efficiency, right? If you can do things, there's again at the beginning I said there's many ways to do things, but without stifling creativity, if you have an admission controller and you basically can say, put some team norms and define them inside of your CI/CD population, you'll actually or configuration, you'll actually be able to realize even greater organizational efficiency. And this is a pure human component, right? And if you have to relearn how somebody did something every single time, again, it's just about it's irritating, it's slower, and time is money, right? Velocity is everything. Time to market matters. Time to value matters. And these are what I view as kind of a next step for us as we'll start to go a little bit further left. I think there is one of the cool things for Wiz for me. You can't do all this at the beginning. You can try, but it's probably going to be an exercise in frustration. I think you need to be pretty deterministic about how it is you're going to do it. I have a phased approach to it. And we'll see where we get. I don't know. But to be totally honest with you, if I stopped incorporating Wiz, all these other features and these other integrations that we have, after that first 48 hours when I got the connector running, I'd still be more than happy with the value. Wiz, the feature velocity is such, and I say this all the time with our account manager, who's been wonderful, the whole account team. You're releasing features faster than I can implement them, right? It's an interesting place to be, and a lot of it looks really fascinating. Some of the endpoint stuff that you have coming, some of the more microcontroller model stuff, some of the embedded stuff. It has some interesting potential. But when you've got so many toys to play with, sometimes you just got to be choosy about how you do it. Yeah.
That's so awesome. And I want to kind of like leave the last 10 to 15 minutes open for audience questions. So we can continue, but I just want to kind of open it up and just make sure that, if anyone else has any other questions, like we can get to those now. Let me try to, oh, I just lost my Zoom screen. Okay. So while those are kind of coming in, what else is like important to you, Jimmy? Like how other than the CI/CD and like kind of like what you're seeing in the portal in terms of like issues and kind of burning down those issues? Like from a security perspective, like what else are you focusing on?
I think it's the one thing that keeps me up at night, right? It's always the thing that you don't find. And to be quite honest, if we have some kind of issue, I want to be able to say we did everything the industry and the current level of technology allowed us to do. I want to be able to go to our leadership organizationally, and I want us to be able to say, we are doing our absolute best every day to make sure we're deploying the best, most efficient, secure solutions we possibly can and meeting the needs of and really accelerating the other organizations that have a stake in this, right? I think one of the early ones was the SBOM conversation, right? Software bill of materials is, because of the mandate in the federal space is creeping its way into the public space, right? Private space. So, these ideas um, drive velocity, not just at the engineering level, but also organizationally across boundaries. I think, I talked about it earlier, the whole green checkmark idea, conversation, right? Where every organization's got a spreadsheet, and it's like the project managers, why is this red? Why is this yellow? Why is this green? And there's this interesting sort of dynamic that happens where the conversation somehow turns from not what that line on that spreadsheet represents, but simply the color of that field, right? Yeah, this has got to be red. Is it green yet? Like, well, let's talk about what that actually means, right? Let's stop and all not measure our success based on the volume of green in spreadsheets, but on our comfort level and our confidence in saying that we've done what we can regardless of your position in the organization, to make sure you're delivering the best possible solutions for your company and your customers, right? That's just it's a great thing to say. It's incredibly hard to do. Personalities, obviously, if you have an OKR that says, you've got to maintain, you can't have more than 18 medium level issues in your environment. Well, you do what you can, right? You do the best possible thing that you can. You're still going to have individuals that, aren't going to have this. They're going to, say things like, well, this is better, or why is this, again, the subjective conversations. And as someone that's been doing technology for 25, maybe even 30 years now, I'm not even sure. Hope not that long. Uh, um, I just want to stay true to the technology, right? And I want to engage with vendors that are committed to that as well. And I want the larger organization that I'm participating in to agree with this idea, right? That's kind of my personal view on it. And again, Wiz has been a great partner in that. I couldn't ask for anything better. And honestly, because I was actually asked, hey, do you want to test drive this? There's this hot new security company that's coming. Would you take a look at it? And I was like, well, sure. Good products and good account teams. Um, it really in the end is about people and quality, and was has just been great, a pleasure to deal with. And I'm gonna keep on it and see where it ends up. And I think in the area of security, you can't over rotate. If you totally destroy your velocity as an engineering team, what have you really done, right? And I think one of the cool things about Wiz, and I actually evaluate other vendors like this now as well, is like, how flexible, how engaged are you, how agile, how well do you respond to our needs organizationally? What's your philosophy as a company? And I had a chance, we were speaking at AWS at reInvent with our partners there. And I like the vibe, I like the level of engagement and the commitment. And it seems that there's, just philosophically and culturally, I like when a vendor lines up with what we're thinking. And that's kind of where we ended up.
That's awesome. And honestly, like that's what we strive to do, right? We're kind of continually building products. We want to be engaged. We want to listen. So, feedback like yours is so important for us. Uh,
It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with everyone. And I'd love to engage more on a deeper level with who is ever interested in it. Certainly, I know we're all busy, but I like to discuss these ideas and see what folks are, what their thoughts are. Maybe I'm way off base. Maybe I don't know. Again, we didn't know what we didn't know when we started this. I don't think there are any 30-year cloud experts around, right? I think we've all kind of got here different ways. My primarily network engineering background that got into software development that took an interesting path to arrive here. And I would love to hear some different ideas about how that's actually affected inside of different organizations. And we can learn from each other. Again, when it comes to security as technologists, um, we all need to be pretty free with these ideas, even if it's through a vendor like Wiz.
That's awesome. Yeah. Two last questions, one from me, one from the audience. The audience question is, have you had discussions with stakeholders that who worry about Wiz having too much visibility or access into your environments?
I've not had that conversation yet, but I think I've had similar conversations about other tools, and when my kind of spider sense goes off when I hear things like that, because
Mhm.
why? What is it because you're concerned about the dirty laundry in the cloud account? Or is it because you're worried about a company like Wiz being exploited and therefore your customers' data being exposed somehow because of the visibility? And the answer to that question drives the very next statement. If it's because you're worried about the exposure of, some maybe potential skeletons that you have in your architecture or some things that aren't as good as they should be, that's a different problem. And again, I think um, the roosters come home eventually, right? So I think you got two choices in that scenario. Fix them. Or if it's really about the level of visibility from any SaaS provider that and level of access required to facilitate that. I think I haven't had this conversation with Wiz, although I might have it now that you mentioned that. How are you protecting my data, right? So how are you ensuring that we're safe and secure? And I'm pretty sure that you already have a great answer. That's my view on that.
Of course, and it's in the docs, in case anyone's gonna asking that right now. Last question for me, and I think like for the audience, like what is I think one thing that you want them to come away with about either maybe like deploying CI/CD or the relationship or selecting policy, like how what like just to conclude, like what is like one thought?
Yeah, I think the number one decision made that we made early that has made everything else possible is the idea of infrastructure as code, right? Now, I realize it's way faster to go into, Azure or GCP or AWS and spin up something, click, 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 like ClickOps based kind of workflow. But the reality is it might feel faster initially, but you are unable to realize the value that vendors like Wiz can bring unless you embrace some, even the most rudimentary infrastructure as code and start managing your cloud configurations in a code sort of way. It doesn't mean if you don't do that today that you can't get value out of Wiz. You can still definitely get 85% of what's value, which is understanding the current state of your cloud, regardless of how it's configured. But from a maturity perspective, I would say that is super important, and look for vendors that integrate with these tools and keep it simple. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Avoid the proliferation of technology in your workflow. Make sure that you're not implementing something for the sake of implementing it. I tell my boss and others all the time, "Hey, we got this new tool." I'm like, no, don't care. I already got something that does it, and I'm happy with it. I don't need it. Right. Let's revisit it in 6 months. I would say that's hugely important. Also, I would think that customers here, your customers, obviously, right? Hopefully, take advantage of the account teams. They're amazing to work with. I think ours, Laura and Sam from Wiz have been wonderful partners. I've had a chance to meet Laura. And others. And I think they've just been hugely supportive and down to earth people, and very transparent, just like I try to be, and we try to be as a cultural norm inside of our team. And it's refreshing. And I would say take advantage of that. Also, don't try to eat the whole thing at once, right? Take a small bite and then say, okay, well, what about this, right? So a very phased, deliberate approach with deterministic outcomes. Again, avoid that, spreadsheet that says implement Wiz fully green. Right. No, don't do that. Right. Definitely say, well, what's the problem that we need to solve? How can we do it? And kind of break it down. And again, I think most industry professionals have probably learned this in our career, but for me, it helped to hear that again. And a lot of the reading that I did when I took this role was focused in that area, relying on predecessors or people working in this space. Certainly in the serverless space, it was new enough where there just wasn't a lot of ideas, right? People were taking paradigms that were specific to, server-based workloads or whatever it is, and trying to apply that. I would say, definitely keep an open mind, look at what's possible. Technology has never been more accessible. I think Wiz is a great example of that. You don't need to have a PhD in computer science to get value out of Wiz. In fact, I think a middle school student would have no problem configuring it. It was really that easy to do. So, and even the more advanced features of Wiz, you can do it in a phased way, and just have open conversations about the value that you're getting out of it. And also, regardless of your school of thought around how you do a continuous improvement, do it. Right? Look, evaluate it. Say, hey, we rolled out this feature in Wiz and we're seeing this, right? And then also speak about it. Reach out, talk about it inside of your organization. Reach out, even if you got those skeletons in the closet. I try to clean mine up before I called the legal people and the compliance people and the security people, but you got to have these conversations and you got to fix it. And honestly, if you're in an organization where someone's going to try to uh, give you a hard time about the past. I'm pretty sure strong strategic leaders, if you said, I'm interested in expanding our security posture and going cross organizational silos and breaking these down a little bit to realize more value, not one of them is going to say you're wrong, regardless of what skeletons you have in the closet, right? I think it's, visibility is a good thing. Security by obscurity doesn't work. And also job security by obscurity doesn't work either, right? Nobody benefits from that. So be transparent, be open, do the best you can, and continuously improve. And I think that's our philosophy, and it's worked relatively well for us. Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier, but in the end, I think our customers and Juniper Networks are ultimately benefiting from that, and that's our goal. That's the definition of success for us.